been a long way. Well... Visit me again.
Oh. I'll be around if you make it back.
You? Thank you kindly.
By placing the Iron Scepter back in the hearts of Brume Tower, we now have access to all the heights and depths of the tower itself. And that's one of the things I really love about this area, and I kind of touched on this in the last chapter, is I love the vertical traversal of Brume Tower. Using these elevators to get to different parts of the tower is just so... It's just a really fun way of getting around. It can be a little confusing, and in some ways the Brume Tower is very labyrinthine despite its vertical nature. There's a lot of hidden pathways between all the elevators and hidden doors and just all sorts of stuff you can run into. It's one of the reasons I really like this area. I wouldn't say Brume Tower is one of my absolute favorite areas in the Dark Souls series, but I do admire the design behind this area and using the verticality of getting around using the elevators and just making these great leaps of faith to get to certain areas. It's a little nerve-wracking to explore, but it's very rewarding when you do, and that's one of the things I feel is a big part of the Dark Souls series, and it is on full display here in Brume Tower. The NPC invasions of Dark Souls 2 are much more abundant than the first game, but most of the NPC invaders you meet in the base game are really pushovers and aren't that hard to deal with. Not so in the DLC expansions. One of these invaders is Maldron the Assassin. He's actually a reoccurring character, as we meet him a second time in the Crown of the Ivory King DLC. Maldron the Assassin is interesting in that he kind of behaves the way that some players do in PvP. He uses very dirty tactics to fight you, and when you first fight him you think, oh, I've got the upper hand, and then he runs down into this cursed tower, so the more you chase him, the more you get cursed, and as such, the less health you have to fight him with. For this fight here, I tend to just focus on the idol and ignore him altogether. Even though you'll die, the idol will remain destroyed, so I don't mind taking him on a second time now that the idol's out of the way. Maldron is a scumbag, and he uses very devious tactics to get rid of you. But I do like how FromSoftware tried to make the NPC invaders of the expansion packs more difficult to deal with, and in some ways they behave more like real players. And you'll find that, with a few exceptions, a lot of the PvP matches in the Dark Souls online experience usually are a bit one-sided. People will use any advantage they can to win, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just part of the PvP landscape. And it's interesting that the developers tried to reflect that in some of the NPC invaders. The Majestic Greatsword is one of the really cool hidden weapons of this expansion. For people who have played the first game, they'll soon discover why this blade is so cool. But first, let's look at the description. An ancient greatsword of unknown origin. This sword was passed down through generations, until it reached Gordon, wandering knight of Ferosa, and was lost upon his death. Uncannily, every last one of the prominent swordsmen who inherited this weapon was left-handed. And it says there that it's an ancient greatsword of unknown origin. But the truth is, if you actually look closely at this greatsword, you'll see that this is the same sword that once belonged to Sir Artorias the Abyss Walker, who, in my opinion, had one of the coolest boss weapons in the first Dark Souls. So the fact that we can have this boss weapon in Dark Souls 2 was a very nice touch. And I like how they created a little story behind it, in that everyone who found this blade, every single one of them was left-handed, because Sir Artorias himself was also left-handed. And if you use this sword in your left hand, it unlocks a unique moveset that is exclusive to this weapon, which I think is really cool, and I'm so glad they kept that in. I'm not sure whether or not I'll be using the sword for this playthrough. I might check it out, but it does have some really cool features to it. If I start getting tired of the Smelter Sword, which is a possibility, I might switch out for the Majestic Greatsword or some equally cool weapon. In short, I'm a sucker for boss weapons, and I was ecstatic to see that Artorias' boss weapon was back in Dark Souls 2. We are now approaching the depths of Brume Tower, and within these depths lies the optional co-op area, the Iron Passage. It's one of the most brutally difficult areas in Dark Souls 2, just because the amount of enemies they throw at you is pretty ridiculous, I have to say. If you're going it alone, it is pretty darn hard. And so unless you're playing with someone, it's not really all that enjoyable, in my opinion. It's definitely a co-op area through and through. That being said, at the end of the Iron Passage lies another optional boss, which is the Blue Smelter Demon. And unlike the original Smelter Demon, which does fire damage, the Blue Smelter Demon does magic damage. So If you want 2 smelter swords, this is the way to get it. You can get a blue one and a fiery one. So I'm not going to be doing the Iron Passage for this playthrough, but I did want to point out it is an area for those who like some co-op gameplay. And co-op, especially in Dark Souls, is always pretty fun.